"You're still young, Alex. You can't bury your future in a shabby apartment like this." That sentence, uttered by Clara's beautiful lips, was as cold and decisive as a knife, and it still echoed in Alexander Sterling's mind. It was the moment his glamorous world, a world of lavish parties, luxury cars, and sweet words, shattered into 1,000 pieces. He had lost everything, or rather, he had deliberately thrown it all away, just to hear a single sentence like that. It was a sentence that exposed the harsh truth that the love he believed in was nothing more than a commodity valued by money. Ironically, it was also the beginning of a journey to find something more valuable than all the wealth he had ever owned. The crystal lights from the giant chandelier at La Lumière restaurant scattered into 1,000 tiny sparks, dancing on expensive glasses and turning the space into a splendid stage. Everything here whispered luxury, from the soft clinking of silver cutlery against porcelain plates to the subtle scent of fine wine mingling in the air. At the center of that stage was Alexander Sterling. He sat there, dapper, in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, his brown hair styled naturally but with deliberate purpose. The smile on his face was both charming and smug, belonging to a man born at the finish line. He was the prince of the Sterling Empire, and the entire city was his kingdom. Opposite him, Clara Vance was as beautiful as a work of art. Her wine-red silk dress hugged her curves, highlighting her fair skin. Every gesture, from the graceful way she raised her wine glass to the way she lightly tossed her golden hair, was calculated to be perfect. She was the most precious jewel in Alexander's collection. Alexander took a deep breath, feeling his heart beat a little faster. He had been planning this moment for weeks. He glanced at the manager, receiving a discreet nod. Immediately, the melodious sound of a violin began to play, softer and more romantic. He stood up, walked around the table, and stopped beside Clara. The entire restaurant seemed to sense the significance of the moment as conversations gradually faded into silence. Alexander slowly knelt on one knee on the cool marble floor. From his jacket pocket, he took out a dark blue velvet box with the logo of a top jewelry brand gleaming under the lights. When the box was opened, a collective gasp of surprise echoed from the surrounding tables. Inside was an unrealistically large oval diamond, surrounded by a ring of smaller diamonds, sparkling brilliantly like a tiny star. "Clara," Alexander's voice was warm and sincere. "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You make my every ordinary day special. Would you agree to let me do that for the rest of my life? Marry me?" Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her blue eyes wide with shock and emotion. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. But if anyone was observant enough, they would have noticed that her eyes, through her tear-filled lashes, were fixed on the diamond. It was as if it were a magnet, drawing all her attention. She nodded eagerly, her voice breaking with the happiness she had long yearned for. "Oh, Alexander, it's perfect. Yes, of course I will," she cried out, throwing herself into his arms. Alexander happily held her tight, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. He didn't realize that in that tight embrace, what Clara was truly holding was not him. The next day, in the office of the Sterling Group chairman, Richard Sterling placed a financial newspaper on the table. The front page wasn't about the stock market, but a perfectly captured image of his son on one knee proposing. He pushed up his glasses, looking at Alexander, who sat across from him, still in a state of blissful happiness. "An impressive show," Richard said, his voice calm, but with a hidden meaning. "Must have cost you a fortune, didn't it?" Alexander laughed. "Just a bit, Dad. What's that compared to my happiness?" Richard raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his powerful leather chair. "Your happiness, or her satisfaction? I think she loves the diamond more than she loves you, Alex." "Dad," Alexander sighed, starting to feel annoyed. "You're always so suspicious. Clara isn't like that. She loves me." "Are you sure?" Richard asked pointedly, his eyes as sharp as a razor. "Does she love you, or does she love the Sterling name, the penthouse, the trips, and the expensive gifts? True love is tested through hardship, not luxury. If it's real gold, it won't fear the fire." His father's words were like stones thrown into the calm lake of Alexander's heart. He loved Clara, he trusted her, but deep down, a vague sense of unease that he had deliberately ignored for so long suddenly arose. Had the gifts and parties become the foundation of their relationship? He wanted to crush his father's doubts. He wanted to prove to himself that his love was real. "Fine," Alexander said, his voice resolute. "I'll put it to the test." The play was even more elaborate than the proposal. That evening, Alexander intentionally came home late. He loosened his tie, ruffled his hair, and even dabbed a little water on his forehead to look like he was sweating. He walked into the penthouse with a heavy step, then slumped onto the sofa. Clara, who was wearing a face mask and watching a fashion show, took off the mask and asked irritably, "Where have you been, coming home this late? Do you know I've been waiting for you?" She stopped abruptly when she saw his state. "Alex, what's wrong? You look awful." Alexander looked up, his eyes bloodshot, thanks to a little eye drop, and his voice hoarse. "It's all over, Clara. Everything's really gone." "Gone? What are you talking about?" "The overseas investment project. It failed completely. We've lost everything. The stock plunged. The bank has frozen all our accounts. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy." Clara froze. The TV remote fell from her hand, making a dry thud on the floor. "No, that's impossible. You're kidding me, right? This is a terrible joke, isn't it, Alex?" "I wish it were a joke," Alexander said, burying his face in his hands. At first, she tried to act like an understanding fiancée. She came to him and patted him on the back. "It's okay, honey. Money can be earned back, as long as we have each other." But as soon as Alexander went into the bathroom, claiming he needed some quiet time, her true colors were immediately revealed. She rushed into the dressing room, locked the door, and dialed her mother's number. Her voice was a panicked, angry whisper. "Mom, there's a big problem. That guy is bankrupt. Do you hear me? Bankrupt. You told me to hold on to this gold mine, but it looks like it's about to turn into a coal mine. What am I going to do now? Am I going to have to sell all my handbags?" The life, as it used to be that she had mentioned, suddenly vanished. Instead, they were in a rented apartment in a middle-class neighborhood. It was clean and safe, but for Clara, it was a rat hole. The smell of new paint couldn't mask the smell of the neighbors cooking. The sound of crying children and noisy TV from the apartment next door replaced the quiet and classical music, and she began to complain. "This mattress is giving me a backache. I'm used to sleeping on a natural latex mattress. I can't believe I have to take the bus. It smells like sweat. It's disgusting. I ran into Tiffany at the mall today. That girl looked at me like I was a strange creature. She probably saw I wasn't carrying a new Birkin bag. It was so embarrassing." Her complaints were like acid, slowly corroding what little patience Alexander had left. Clara's sweet smile disappeared, replaced by a constant pout and an annoyed look in her eyes. "I can't live like this forever, Alex." She repeated that sentence every day. Finally, after almost a month, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood in front of Alexander, arms crossed, her face cold and distant. She looked at him with a fake, pitiful gaze, the kind of look one gives an outdated luxury item. "I'm sorry, Alex. We had some good memories, but I have to be realistic. I'm still young. I can't bury my future in a shabby apartment like this." Alexander was stunned. He had anticipated this, but when it actually happened, his heart still ached as if someone had cut it with a knife. He looked at her, trying to find a bit of affection, a hint of attachment, but all he saw was cold selfishness. A few days later, a friend sent him a picture. Clara, in a new dress, was arm in arm with a bald, pot-bellied real estate tycoon who was wearing a solid gold Patek Philippe watch. They were laughing happily on a luxurious yacht. The play had ended. He had his answer, a bitter and brutal one. He had been right to listen to his father. But the price of this truth was a broken heart. The apartment door slammed shut behind Clara, completely cutting off the world Alexander once knew. A sudden silence fell, heavy and thick. He stood motionless in the messy living room, her expensive perfume still lingering in the air like a bitter mockery. He was not angry, nor was he heartbroken. He just felt empty. A deep black hole had just swallowed all his emotions, leaving a cold void. The following days passed like a slow-motion film, faded and meaningless. Alexander left the apartment to sink into darkness, the curtains always drawn. He didn't clean or cook. Pizza boxes, empty beer cans, and instant noodle packages were scattered everywhere, turning the apartment into a distorted replica of his life at that moment, chaotic and without a way out. One evening, in a moment of despair, he picked up his phone. It was an unconscious habit. The screen lit up, and his social media feed immediately showed him a picture. Clara, radiant in a designer bikini, was posing on the deck of a luxury yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean. Next to her was the pot-bellied tycoon, his hand possessively on her waist. The cheesy caption read, "Living the life you deserve." Deserve. The anger he had suppressed for so long erupted like a volcano. He let out an inarticulate roar and threw his phone against the wall. The screen shattered, flashing its last sparks before going dark, just like his last bit of faith in love. He slumped down, his hands covering his head, feeling completely helpless. He had directed this play himself, but now he was the only audience member of a tragedy he had created. He needed an escape. A place without memories, a place quiet enough that he wouldn't have to hear the screams in his head. And he found it at the city library. The old building with its towering columns and the characteristic smell of old books felt like another world, completely separate from the noise and deceit outside. Alexander chose a table in the most secluded corner, near a window that overlooked a small courtyard with an old oak tree. He went there every day, not to read, but just to sit. He watched the dust motes dancing in the slanted sunlight, watched strangers pass by, lost in their own worlds. The presence of knowledge and the surrounding tranquility had a strange, soothing effect. Elena Hayes, the librarian with tortoiseshell glasses and her hair always in a neat bun, had noticed the young man with the sad eyes. He came very early and left very late, never borrowing a single book, just sitting there, silently like a shadow. She saw the pain hidden behind his indifferent exterior. She had met many people like that, lost souls who sought refuge in the library. One rainy afternoon, seeing Alexander huddled by the window, perhaps from the cold, perhaps from loneliness, Elena decided to do something. She brewed a hot cup of chamomile tea, its gentle herbal scent filling the air. She walked to his table and placed the cup down as gently as she could. Alexander started, looking up with a hint of defensiveness. "Tea will make you feel better," Elena said softly, with a kind, non-judgmental smile, then quickly turned away to give him space. That unexpected and simple kindness stunned Alexander. No one asked who he was. No one looked at him with pity. It was just a warm cup of tea. The next day, when he returned the cup, he hesitated and said thank you. Those were the first words he had spoken to a stranger in weeks. Gradually, Elena's presence became a part of his aimless days. A few days later, seeing him lingering in front of the self-help section, staring blankly at the cliché titles, she quietly approached. She said nothing, just took a classic novel from the adjacent shelf, a story of redemption and new beginnings, and gently placed it in his hand. Its title was Starting Over. One day, while looking for the restroom, Alexander happened to pass an open door to a small meeting room. He heard Elena's familiar voice. She was standing in front of a group of students, passionately talking about their startup project. "Your idea for a volunteer matching app is great, but your revenue model isn't sustainable. Relying solely on advertising won't be enough. Have you thought about partnering with businesses to create social responsibility programs? That would be your main and stable source of income." The way she analyzed the market and pointed out the flaws in their plan with logic and sharpness completely captivated Alexander. He stood by the door, listening to every word. This girl was not just a book-loving librarian. She was intelligent, had vision, and possessed an analytical mind that many CEOs he had met would envy. Inspired and intrigued by what he saw, Alexander began to have more conversations with Elena during her free time. He told her about his failed business dream, a version modified to fit his normal Alex persona. He talked about being betrayed by his business partner and the person he loved most. Elena listened attentively, her eyes behind her glasses showing deep empathy. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply listened. "Failure isn't the end," she said after he finished his story. Her voice was gentle but carried weight. "It's just an old chapter that has closed. You love books. I see you spend hours here, turning each page with such care. Why not open a small bookstore? It doesn't have to be big, just a place where people can find peace. A place to start over. A small bookstore. A place where people could find peace." Elena's words were like a key, opening a door that Alexander didn't know existed in his mind. For the first time since the shock, he felt a glimmer of hope ignite, warm and real. It wasn't the fleeting excitement of buying a new supercar, but a goal, a purpose. He looked at Elena, the simple girl who had unintentionally saved him with a cup of tea and an idea. His eyes lit up with a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. A bookstore, named A Peaceful Haven. Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much. That moment marked Alexander's transformation. He was no longer the shattered heir or the aimless Alex. He was a man determined to rebuild everything from scratch, with the companionship of a genuine friend. The journey to find his greatest reward had truly begun. The idea of a peaceful haven became the lifesaver that pulled Alexander out of the swamp of despair. The spark of hope that Elena had lit quickly flared into a fierce determination. Alexander used his last savings, the money he had kept for a rainy day outside of his father's plan, to rent a small space on a quiet street with shady trees. The old shop was dusty, smelled of dampness and musty, but in Alexander and Elena's eyes, it held a whole future. They threw themselves into the renovation work with incredible energy. Alexander, who had never held a hammer in his life, was now fumbling with pine wood boards, his back soaked with sweat. He scraped off the peeling paint from the walls and built each bookshelf himself. The scratches on his hands, the sore aches at the end of the day, brought a strange sense of satisfaction, a feeling of being alive that he had never experienced when signing million-dollar checks. Elena, with her refined taste and boundless love for books, became the soul of the place. She chose a warm cream paint color, which made the space feel more spacious and bright. She scoured second-hand stores to find worn leather armchairs and vintage lamps. She meticulously sorted and arranged each book, creating cozy, charming reading nooks. Their friendship deepened and grew stronger through their hard work. They ate simple lunchboxes together right on the dusty floor, laughed at a paint smudge on each other's faces, and had lively debates about where to place Hemingway's works. On opening day, A Peaceful Haven wasn't loud or extravagant. It only had a small handwritten wooden sign. But the cozy atmosphere, the sincerity of the two owners, and the carefully selected titles quickly attracted true book lovers. The bookstore gradually became a familiar spot, a peaceful oasis in the heart of the bustling city. Word spread, and an article in a local culture magazine praised A Peaceful Haven as a hidden gem, a business model full of passion. And then, trouble came, in a beautiful and familiar form. Clara, after a few months of living in luxury, had been dumped without mercy by the pot-bellied tycoon who went after a younger model. Out of money and without any more relationships to exploit, she was in a dead end. By chance, she read the article about the bookstore. When she saw a picture of Alex smiling brightly next to the simple librarian, a calculating gleam appeared in her eyes. She didn't believe in love, but she believed in potential. A man who could build a business from scratch like that was certainly not an ordinary person. Perhaps the coal mine of the past was about to turn back into a gold mine. The next day, she showed up at A Peaceful Haven. She wore a simple floral dress and light makeup, trying to appear fragile and pitiful. When she saw Alexander, who looked much more rugged and mature, passionately recommending a book to a customer, she walked over, her eyes immediately welling up with tears. "Alex," she sobbed, her voice choked. I was wrong. I was so stupid and shallow. These past few days without you, I realized that I can live without diamonds and yachts. But without you, I can't live. Please, give me a chance to make it up to you." Alexander looked at her, his heart completely unmoved. He knew this play by heart. He kept a polite distance. "I'm sorry, Clara. Our story is over. Please don't disturb my business." Rejected so brutally in front of many people, Clara was embarrassed and furious. If she couldn't have him, she would ruin him. That night, she poured all her resentment onto her keyboard. Using a series of fake accounts, she launched a smear campaign against A Peaceful Haven. She wrote negative reviews, fabricating stories that the bookstore sold pirated books at exorbitant prices, and the owner had a rude attitude and disrespected customers, even inventing a story about being harassed by the owner, Alex. The posts were shared in several community groups and caused a minor media crisis. The bookstore's phone rang constantly. A few regular customers called to ask questions, and some online orders were cancelled. Alexander knew who was responsible immediately. He asked a friend in the IT industry for help. In just one morning, his friend sent him a detailed report, tracing all the fake accounts back to a single IP address, the address of the apartment Clara was renting. He decided to end this play once and for all. "Thank you for showing me your true colors once again, Clara. You've never changed. Is this how you wanted to start over, with lies and sabotage?" Clara was speechless, her face as white as a sheet of paper. She stammered, unable to form a word. Just then, Elena, whom Alexander had arranged to meet with an investor, walked into the cafe. She saw Clara's expression, then looked at Alexander, her eyes showing a hint of concern. Alexander turned to Elena, his face full of apology. He knew he had to tell her the truth now. "Elena, I'm sorry. I've been hiding something from you." "I'm not." Unexpectedly, Elena raised her hand and gently interrupted him. She smiled, a kind smile that dispelled all the confusion and guilt in his heart. "I know," she said simply. She took an old, yellowed newspaper clipping, folded neatly, from her purse. She opened it, and on it was a picture of Alexander Sterling receiving the Young Entrepreneur of the Year award, his smile at the time confident and a little arrogant, unlike now. "I recognized you from day one." "From day one," he finally managed to say, his voice a little hoarse. "How? Why didn't you say anything?" Elena smiled gently, a smile that was both a little mischievous and deeply understanding. She pushed up her glasses, looking directly at him. "The first day you walked into the library, I recognized you. It's hard not to recognize the heir to the Sterling Group, even though you tried to dress simply. At the time I thought, oh, another bored rich boy here to find a new pastime. I kept my distance." She paused, taking a sip of tea. "But then I saw you come back, day after day. I didn't see arrogance or boredom. I only saw a truly lonely man, his eyes filled with a sadness I had never seen in the newspapers. I saw you turn to books, not as a decorative item, but as a sanctuary. And then, when we built a peaceful haven together, I saw a completely different Alex." Her voice became gentler. "I saw a man who didn't." Alexander started, quickly standing up. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Richard didn't answer immediately. His sharp eyes swept across the bookstore, stopping at the neatly arranged bookshelves and the cozy reading nook with the old armchairs. Finally, his gaze rested on Elena, not with a scrutinizing look, but with one of satisfaction and respect. "I came to see how my son's investment was developing," he said, his voice calm. Then he turned to Elena. "Hello, Elena. I'm Richard Sterling. It's a pleasure to meet you, although I've actually known you for quite some time." Elena was a little flustered, but she quickly regained her composure, stood up, and politely nodded in greeting. Richard smiled, a rare and meaningful smile. He revealed a truth that astonished both Alexander and Elena. "I've been watching you since the first day Alex came to the library, Elena. I had my people pretend to be headhunters from a rival corporation and offer you a position at. Hello, my daughter-in-law, Elena. Welcome to the Sterling family." His approval was not just a blessing for their love, it was the highest form of recognition for Elena's character, intellect, and integrity. All the challenges had ended. Now, before them were not paths full of doubt, but a new road they would walk together, with absolute trust and a love that had been tested through hardship. As night fell, the small street returned to its usual tranquility. Inside a peaceful haven, the warm yellow light streamed from the windows, creating a scene as serene as its name. The scent of new books mingled with the smell of pine and the faint aroma of jasmine tea. After the last customers left, Alexander and Elena were tidying up a newly arrived bookshelf. They worked in a comfortable, synchronized silence. Each knew their exact place, knew exactly what to do, just as they had found their place with each other. Alexander's voice was warm, sincere, and a little shaky. "Elena, you walked into my life when it was just a crumpled blank page. You helped me rewrite it, filling it with the most beautiful chapters. You taught me that true value isn't in what we own, but in the story we create. I don't want to write any more chapters of my life without you by my side. Will you agree to write the story of our life with me?" Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. These weren't tears of being overwhelmed by luxury, but tears of pure happiness. She couldn't speak, just nodded eagerly, and held out her trembling hand. Alexander carefully placed the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it were born for her. He stood up, and they shared a deep kiss. A kiss that held all the challenges they had overcome and the promise of a happy future ahead. A few days later, news of their engagement spread. A year later, A peaceful haven was no longer just a single small bookstore. It had grown into a chain of cultural shops, a brand that stood for integrity, knowledge, and sincere love. Each store had a corner for young authors and a scholarship fund, named after Elena Hayes, to support literature students from difficult backgrounds. In the first bookstore, where their story began, Elena was standing by the window, gently rubbing her round, swollen belly. She wore a light blue maternity dress and looked gentle and content. Alexander walked up behind her, gently wrapping his arms around her from both sides, his large hands resting on her belly. He felt a light kick. "Look, he's kicking again. He must be a lively little reader," Elena said, happily resting her head on his shoulder. Alexander smiled, his smile no longer holding the smugness of the past, but a deep sense of peace and contentment. He kissed her hair, inhaling her familiar scent.